Hi everybody, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you. This next sort of 15 minutes is really just a reflection on one of the key issues affecting healthcare systems. We've talked a lot about e-health and how we can use technology to improve health and improve healthcare that we offer. But I guess this little 15-minute slot is really going to reflect a little bit more on the other side, which is the actual people, and how we can really corral the people to get the better healthcare system. Leadership in healthcare is a real challenge. I think Aine earlier identified to us that what we need is, on one hand, a very effective system, a safe system, a system that gives patients high-quality care, gives them what they want, gives it at the time they want, motivates them to look after their own health. But all of us who are leaders and managers in healthcare know that on the other side of the system is the fact that we need to be efficient. And I think, Aine, you had those two words up in one of your slides. How can we be efficient and effective in the current healthcare systems that we have around the world? And I think one of the things that I reflected on in preparing this presentation was that it often feels a little bit like this, that actually the balance is tipping more as a healthcare leader and as a healthcare manager particularly towards efficiency rather than effectiveness. And that doesn't feel right. That's not right for the consumer, which is the patient at the end of it. So I guess what we need to think about is how that affects us as clinical leaders and us as healthcare leaders. So when we think about how we lead and how we might take things forward with people, there are a number of options open to us, and I'm sure you're all very aware of the literature in thinking about that. But you can take the option when you're trying to lead and trying to change and trying to innovate and trying to manage healthcare of the sort of more authoritarian approach. You can sort of say, actually, I'm going to lead by example. I want you all to do this, this, and this. If you all line up in order, we will create a better healthcare system. But if you look at what everybody's publishing and what everybody's saying about how to actually get people to change, it's much more about this. It's much more about getting people to inspire people to be different, not to tell people how to be different. We also know that actually leadership certainly in the NHS, which is where I work, but also within healthcare across the world, has traditionally been about people pushing and driving systems to become better. People deciding this needs to be a better system and we're going to drive it. But actually good leadership, good clinical leadership, good managerial leadership is about taking it and pulling it in the right direction, about being at the front and not being at the back. So if we think about how we direct healthcare in the next decade, we need to think about how we, as people in this room in leading our systems, don't just be at the front directing, but actually be at the front leading and unlocking the system for people. Because our biggest resource in terms of what's happening around us is the people and getting those people to engage with the systems. So we all know, if you look in the healthcare literature, in the leadership literature, etc., that we're all challenged to have lots of qualities as healthcare leaders. And as these come up on the slides, you can think, yes, I have integrity and humility and strategy and focus and vision. And actually, all of those things are really, really important. But they also tell us that we need to inspire and influence, we need to pioneer, we need to innovate and transform. So actually, there's a huge amount of pressure on us as healthcare leaders. And whilst innovation is there to help us, the leader in the system is the person who will unlock the door between actually making something effective as well as efficient. So leaders have a great deal of pressure, and I think anybody in this room who leads a system will feel that pressure in the current climate. So this is a reflection really of actually how can we really maximize our leadership potential? How can we really start to work differently to make those changes? In doing that, I sort of thought, okay, well, what do we know? And went back and had a look at some quotes, and I saw a quote earlier which I really like, and I tend to collect quotes that I really like. This is actually Aristotle, and he said, he who cannot be a good follower cannot be a good leader. What does that tell us about how we need to behave? If we are going to lead others, we need to have the ability to be led, but to also learn from other people. Bill Gates, a great leader and innovator in terms of changing systems, said, if we look into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others, They're not the people who actually stand at the front always. Another great leader of our century. It is better to lead from behind and to put others in front, especially when you're there to celebrate success. But you need to take up the front line when there is a situation of danger. Then people will appreciate your leadership. All of these things are little tidbits that we can think about how we ourselves might actually take forward leadership in our organisation. Winston Churchill told us actually it's attitude that makes the difference. It's not necessarily always skill. And then Eleanor Roosevelt, I like this quote particularly, "A good leader inspires other people to have confidence in their leader." That's what we would all want. But actually a great leader inspires people to have confidence in themselves. And I think we heard some of that about this concept of people actually having confidence in themselves to manage their health, having confidence in themselves to manage and to take forward healthcare into the next century. So how can we be successful if we're going to be good leaders in terms of making the changes and using innovation? Well, for me, the best way of optimizing our success is to actually invest most in our greatest resource. And the greatest resource in healthcare anywhere is the people. If you look at all the budgets in all the healthcare systems in the world, it's the people that cost the most. So if we don't invest in the people, then we're not going to maximize the potential we have in healthcare. Investing in people is where I bring the two parts of this together, which is investing in people is all about how we manage and communicate with people. So it's really just now for the next 5 minutes a reflection on how do we communicate most efficiently with people. And this is another great leader. I suppose leadership at one time meant muscles, but today it means getting along with people. So how do we do that effectively? We do it through how we communicate. So our clinical leaders, our leaders in healthcare, need to be clinical experts. They need to have the knowledge and skills in the field that they have to have knowledge and skills in. But they also need to be pioneers. They need to be the people who see the vision, who see how things can be different, who actually see that goal and think that's what we need to do. In 5 years' time, things don't need to look like this. They don't need to look like a ghetto blaster. They can look like a mobile phone. If people don't have that creative ability, they're not going to help us lead in the future. But then they need to do two things. They don't just need to be out there by themselves. They need to engage and know how to deal with individuals as the people, and they need to know how to deal with teams. And so the skill set of a leader in the modern healthcare systems across the world is much broader than it might have been in the past. So they don't only have to have those skills around being pioneers themselves, but they need to know how to manage the people. And there's a lot out there if you wanted to look, but these were just 3 or 4 key things that for me have been really important. So in terms of being a creative pioneer, it's no good being a creative pioneer if you can't communicate that inspiration to other people. So creative pioneers challenge boundaries and norms, but they don't just do that themselves, they can actually do that in the right way to meet the needs of the system they work in. So when I talk to healthcare leaders in England, one of the things I'm very aware of is that the great leaders really understand the drivers and the requirements of the system within which they work. That's something when you look at middle-level leaders, they often don't have. They don't have the bigger picture. They understand what they need to do, but they don't necessarily understand all the drivers. So really good pioneers understand the drivers. We need to ensure the people around us understand why we're doing things. And then we have to have the skills to sell those ideas, to actually be able to say to other people, do you know, this is why I'm doing it. This is what's important about it. Actually, we could do this, we could do it the same, but we're not going to move on. If we do things different, we can move on. And again, often clinical leaders are not great at selling their messages. It's not what they were trained to do. They're not necessarily great at saying things concisely or simply. They're not necessarily great at explaining all the benefits and risks. So for me, one of the things creative pioneers need to really start to think about is how they sell their messages and how they start to influence other people. The second area we said was important was about understanding how to motivate and interact with individuals. And that's what I call the psychology of managing people. And that's the modern leader today doesn't just have to be a good pioneer, a creative expert, be able to sell their story, but they actually need to have emotional intelligence. They need to understand other individuals. They need to understand personality types. They need to understand learning styles. They need to understand how other individuals tick so that they can best work with those individuals to move them on. Myers-Briggs has been around for years and years and years. Everybody's heard of it. Lots of people misinterpret it. But for me, it's really important. If I speak to a certain person in a way where their message, my message is dissonant with their message, I'm not going to get my message through. A lot of people, clinical experts, will give people messages in a way that they themselves want to hear it. They don't think about the audience and how they might like to hear it. So it's really important for people who are good leaders to understand how other people receive messages. It's also really important to understand how other people learn, how other people take on board information. Do they want to read about it? Do they want to hear me talk about it? Do they want to see it? Do they want to engage with it and touch it and feel it and really understand it? And actually, if we're going to change systems, things like technology, do they need to see the evidence, or do they actually need to see it work? We need to address it if we're going to lead and change systems. And then the final thing just to remind ourselves about is that it's not always about engaging with individuals, it's about engaging with teams. And the modern healthcare leader is not just a manager and a leader in those terms, but about taking much more coaching approaches. And the reason that now coaching is becoming so big, coaching and mentoring is becoming so big within healthcare systems, is because it empowers other people to take more responsibility for making decisions. And there's a lot now working in terms of how we can coach patients to motivate and empower them, not just work with them in a more didactic way. So understanding team roles, understanding how people work together, understanding coaching is really important. Coaching traditionally in sport is about unlocking potential, but it's no different in healthcare. We have to unlock potential. And the reason why? Well, this is an interesting thought. As a manager, how can I find the time to coach my staff? It's actually much, much quicker to dictate. If I just tell someone what to do, they go off and do it, and that's great. But paradoxically, if I coach them and develop them, they have much greater responsibility, and that will free up my time. So next time they want an answer, they won't come back to me. They'll actually do it themselves. So I free up my time to do my job rather than my time to manage them. So the ethos of coaching is about empowering others. The downside of not coaching is if I am constantly telling someone what to do and it doesn't work, who do they blame when it goes wrong? So to create a healthcare system that's going to move forward, we need to empower our staff, our greatest resource, to embrace innovation, to take things forward. It is a tricky challenge. It pulls us in different directions. Leadership and managing people is the hardest thing we're going to have to take on board if we're going to change the health system and make it efficient and make it affordable. And our service users at times pull us in another direction as well. But hopefully that challenge won't pull us apart. Hopefully it will help us bring things together and lead to success. Thank you.